We have been in touch with access modifiers since the video about variables and data types, and since then they have made quite a few appearances in the succeeding videos. But till now, other than giving you a textbook definition about it, I have not actually explained to you what access modifiers are and why they are necessary. As I have said before, access modifiers are used to control the visibility of your variables to other parts of your code. This means that they decide where you will be able to access the variables and be able to read or modify the data stored inside them. In C Sharp, you have 6 access modifiers, namely public, private, protected, internal, private protected, protected internal, that lets you access the variables at different scopes. Now, before moving forward to explaining each of these access modifiers, what we need to talk about is assemblies. But sadly, even I don't have a working knowledge of assemblies, so I'm not a good resource to learn about it in any regards. But what I could extrapolate from doing a bit of research in the Unity documentation is that an assembly is a C# code library that contains the compiled classes and structs that are defined in your various scripts and which also defines references to other assemblies. By default, Unity compiles almost all of your game scripts into a predefined assembly called assembly-c#.dll, as you can see here, and also creates a few smaller specialized predefined assemblies. What this tells me is that by default, most of the scripts that we will write for our games will all be part of the assembly-c#.dll file, and we won't be talking between assemblies most of the time. I know that as a complete beginner, you might be feeling VP, what the duck is your point, and I can empathize with that. But the reason I'm going through all this trouble is that if you go to the MSDN page to look at the specifications for access modifiers, the definitions for them will all be from the perspective of assemblies. So before I started talking about access modifiers, you needed to know that by default, most of your scripts will be part of the same assembly when you are working with Unity. With that out of the way, let's move forward and talk about each of the access modifiers one by one. First is public. Any type or member in your code that is using the public access modifier can be accessed by any piece of code that is part of the same or a different assembly. In a practical sense, what this means is if you have a method that is declared as public, you will be able to access that method across multiple different scripts that are part of the same assembly or different assemblies. In case of Unity, as by default all your game scripts will be part of assembly-c#.dll, you will basically be able to access this variable or method that you have defined as public from anywhere in your code. Next is internal, which will allow the type or member to be accessed by any piece of code that is part of the same assembly, but will not allow code from scripts that are part of different assembly to access this type or member. If you are using the default settings in Unity, then in practice you will see no difference between public and internal, as by default all your game scripts will be part of the same assembly. After that we have private. If a type or member in your code is defined as private, then you will only be able to access this type or member from within the same class or struct. What this means is, if you have declared a variable or method as private in, let's say, script A, then you would not be able to access this variable or method in script B directly. The fourth one is protected. If a type or member is defined as protected, then you will only be able to access them from within the same class or from within classes derived from this class. What this means is, suppose you have 3 scripts, script A, script B, and script C, and all of them have class X, Y, or Z defined within them respectively, with class Z actually being a derived class, with the base class being class X, defined in script A. In this scenario, members defined as protected in class X will only be accessible within class X and class Z, while these members will not be accessible within class Y. I've yet to cover inheritance, so some of you might be confused about derived classes, but for now, don't think about it too much, as in the next video I'll be talking about inheritance and will explain everything related to it. After that we have protected internal. Any type or member defined as protected internal will be accessible within the same assembly, while also being accessible within derived classes in other assemblies. And the final access modifier is private protected. Any type or member defined as private protected will be accessible only within the code which is in the same class or a derived class in the same assembly. These final two access modifiers are in practice basically combination of two separate access modifiers which gives you a bit more control over the visibility of your type or member. Now with all that explained, when you're writing a script, you should try making all the variables of the class private, as you do not want to give direct access to these variables to the piece of code that is not part of this class until it is absolutely necessary. But as you might still want to give access to these variables outside the class in which they were defined, what you can do is define a public method or a getter-setter property which will allow you to access the stored data within these variables in a structured and controlled way. I will link some resources such as the Unity documentation and the MFDN page about assemblies in the description of the video, so if you are so inclined, you can study it yourself. But although I'm sure that it would be great if you understand the knowledge about assemblies and how you can use them to make better games, at least wait until you have a good enough understanding about the basics of programming and then try to delve into the nitty-gritties like this. Well folks, that does it for today's video. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you like the content. Do comment below if you have any doubts or if you just want to share your thoughts. And as always, if you see someone struggling down in the comment section, do try and help them. Goodbye for now. This is your host VP signing off.